A man who once shattered the illusion of his own reality awakens beneath twin suns in a galaxy governed by something far older than code. The Force does not operate like the Matrix he escaped. It cannot be hacked, rewritten, or bent to will without consequence. Yet Neo sees it as structure, as pattern, as probability waiting to collapse into truth. The Jedi are nearly gone, hunted to extinction by an empire that wields darkness like law. And now, that same empire has learned of the stranger who perceives destiny itself as information, who moves between timelines the way others move through space. In a universe where the Force binds all living things, what happens when someone arrives who can see the threads holding everything together? The outer rim shimmered beneath twin suns, casting their amber glow across deserts that had swallowed civilizations whole. On a forgotten world called Exerthus, ruins older than the Republic itself jutted from dunes like broken teeth. The planet had no strategic value, no settlements worth defending, no resources the Empire cared to claim. It existed in galactic memory only as a footnote in Jedi archives, a place where ancient seekers had once come to die in pursuit of truths the galaxy had long since abandoned. Scholars spoke of the Exerthus, a Force sect that believed reality itself was malleable, that what most perceived as immutable law was merely consensus upheld by collective belief. Their temples had crumbled into sand millennia ago. Their writings had been declared heretical by the Jedi Council and burned during the Great Cleansing. Only whispers remained, encoded in holocrons sealed so deeply within temple vaults that even the Purge had not unearthed them all. But the Force moved in ways no empire could anticipate. In the shadow of a collapsed archway, a man opened his eyes to a sky he did not recognize. Thomas Anderson had many names across many lifetimes. The Resistance had called him Neo. The machines had called him the One. The Matrix had called him an anomaly, a glitch in code meant to be deleted, a variable that refused to resolve. He had died to save a world built on illusion. His body dissolved into golden light as the machines granted humanity a fragile peace. He remembered the sensation of unmaking, of becoming pattern rather than flesh, of dispersing into the architecture of something vast and incomprehensible. He had expected nothingness, oblivion, the quiet erasure every program feared. Instead, he woke here. Sand clung to his long coat, the same coat, impossibly preserved despite his dissolution. His circular sunglasses rested beside him, lenses cracked but intact. The air tasted wrong, no industrial smog, no recycled atmosphere, just heat and dust and something else. Something he felt rather than saw, a current running beneath reality itself. Invisible filaments connecting every grain of sand, every breath of wind, every photon cascading from the suns above. It reminded him of the code, the cascading green symbols that had once revealed the truth of his world. But this was different. The code had been static, predictable once you understood its structure. This moved with intention, with life. Neo stood slowly, joints protesting. His body felt heavier than he remembered, more solid, as if whatever had brought him here had rebuilt him atom by atom with unfamiliar materials. He reached for the perception that had once allowed him to see through the Matrix, to bend its rules, to stop bullets with thought alone. Nothing happened. The world remained stubbornly opaque, refusing to dissolve into streams of information. Panic touched the edges of his mind before discipline reasserted itself. He had learned patience in dark places. He would learn the rules of this reality as he had learned the last. The ruins stretched before him in geometric patterns worn smooth by ages. Hieroglyphs covered every surface, spiraling fractals that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than his eyes could process. He moved toward the nearest column, hand extended. The moment his fingers brushed stone, the world ignited. Vision exploded across his consciousness, not in green code, but in brilliant blue light that traced pathways through space and time. He saw civilizations rising and falling in heartbeats. Starships crossing impossible distances through tunnels of twisted space. Warriors wielding blades, made of pure energy, their movements too fast for normal perception, guided by something that anticipated probability itself. He saw a republic spanning thousands of worlds, brought low by treachery and pride. He saw an empire built on fear and darkness, crushing hope beneath mechanical tyranny. He saw glimpses of individuals blazing with purpose, monks in simple robes moving objects without touching them, priests of shadow conjuring lightning from hatred, soldiers dying for causes they barely understood. All of it connected by luminous threads, an immense web of cause and effect that made the Matrix look like a child's toy. At the center of every thread, every connection, every moment of significance, he felt the presence of something vast and conscious. Not a machine intelligence, not an algorithm, something older, something that recognized him. The Force reached out, and Neo reached back. The vision shattered. He stumbled away from the pillar, breathing hard. His heart hammered against ribs that suddenly felt too fragile to contain what he had just experienced. Understanding crashed over him in waves. This was not a simulation, not code awaiting manipulation. This was a galaxy alive with something the inhabitants called the Force, a binding energy that connected all living things, past and present and future, in a tapestry of destiny and choice. And somehow, impossibly, he could perceive its structure. Not as the Jedi did, through meditation and surrender. Not as the Sith did, through passion and dominance. He saw it as information, as probability clouds and decision trees, as patterns waiting to be recognized and, perhaps, rewritten. The sound of engines shattered his revelation. Neo's combat instincts, honed through countless battles against agents and sentinels, brought him into motion before conscious thought. He dove behind rubble as 3 starfighters screamed overhead, sleek, aggressive designs with solar panels flanking central cockpits. TIE fighters, his new awareness informed him, though he did not know how he knew. Imperial patrol, hunting, searching. The fighters banked in formation, circling the ruins like predators scenting prey. One broke away, descending toward his position with repulsor lifts howling. Dust cycloned around the landing site as the fighter settled, its boarding hatch hissing open. A figure emerged humanoid, clad in white armor that seemed designed more for intimidation than protection. The stormtrooper carried a blaster rifle with practiced ease, sweeping it across the ruins in search patterns that spoke of military discipline. Neo remained perfectly still. In the Matrix, he had learned to move between perception and action, to exist in the gaps where agents could not follow. Here, he applied the same principle, letting his breathing slow until it matched the rhythm of wind across sand. The stormtrooper passed within meters, helmet swiveling, but somehow failed to register his presence. Neo recognized the sensation probability collapsing in his favor, paths of cause and effect subtly altered by will alone. He was bending the rules again, different rules. Same principle. The trooper activated a communicator built into his helmet. Sector 7 Alpha clear. No sign of the anomaly. Proceeding to next grid. Anomaly. They were looking for him specifically. But how? He had been here less than an hour, had interacted with nothing but ruins and sand. Unless his arrival itself had caused some kind of disturbance, a ripple in this Force energy that sensitive instruments could detect. Or sensitive individuals. The stormtrooper returned to his fighter and lifted off, rejoining his squadron. They continued their search pattern, moving deeper into the ruin field. Neo waited until the engine sounds faded before emerging from cover. He needed answers. Needed to understand what he had become, what this place was, and why the dominant power structure already knew to fear him. The ruins held knowledge, he had felt it in that first vision, but accessing it without drawing more attention required caution. He spent the next hours exploring systematically, touching each pillar and archway with careful intention, letting the visions come in controlled bursts rather than overwhelming floods. The Exerthus had been scholars of what they called the unifying force, the aspect that connected all moments across time. They believed the galaxy operated according to patterns, vast cosmic algorithms that determined the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of heroes and villains, the eternal dance between what they named the light and the dark. But they had gone further than most Force traditions. They claimed these patterns could be perceived directly, studied like mathematical proofs, and under specific circumstances, edited. The Jedi Council had declared this heresy. To alter the Force's natural flow, they argued, was to invite catastrophe to substitute individual will for cosmic balance. The Exerthus had countered that the Force itself was not immutable law but collaborative story, constantly written and rewritten by the choices of living beings. Consciousness, they taught, was the universe observing itself, and observation changed the observed. The Jedi had responded with fire and purges. The Exerthus had chosen exile over recantation, retreating to worlds like this to continue their research away from dogmatic oversight. They had been trying to do what Neo had done in the Matrix. They had been trying to wake up. The revelation carried weight. He was not the first to perceive reality as something other than fixed truth. But the Exerthus had failed, their civilization reduced to dust and forgotten warnings. What had they missed? What trap had claimed them that he needed to avoid? The ruins offered no clear answer, only fragments and implications. But one thing became clear: through repetition, across multiple visions, the Exerthus had attracted the attention of something that existed between the light and dark, something that fed on those who tried to transcend the binary choice the galaxy demanded. They called it the Grey Paradox, and their warnings about it carried the weight of existential terror. Night fell across Exerthus with startling speed, the twin suns plunging beneath the horizon simultaneously. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in minutes. Neo huddled in the shelter of a partially intact chamber, surrounded by hieroglyphs that seemed to glow faintly in darkness. He did not sleep, could not sleep with questions burning through his mind, but he entered the meditative state he had learned from Morpheus, the stillness that allowed code to resolve into meaning. Here, in this new reality, the meditation took on different character. He felt the Force moving through him like breath, like blood, connecting him to the sand beneath his body and the stars emerging overhead. He reached out carefully, testing the sensation, and awareness expanded. He felt life scattered across the ruins, small creatures hunting in darkness, plants drawing moisture from stone, insects swarming in hidden caverns, all of it connected, all of it part of the pattern. He pushed further, consciousness spreading like ripples across water, and touched something massive approaching from beyond the atmosphere. Ships. Many ships. Not Imperial this time. The sensation carried different texture, cold discipline mixed with fanatical certainty, belief wielded like a weapon. These newcomers hunted him with religious fervor rather than military protocol. Neo opened his eyes as the first ship broke atmosphere, trailing fire across the night sky. It was a frigate of some kind, angular and brutal, its hull painted in deep crimson marked with symbols he instinctively recoiled from. More ships followed, a small fleet descending on the ruins with clear purpose. Searchlights lanced out, cutting through darkness, sweeping across sand and stone. They knew exactly where to look. He moved before they could establish a perimeter, flowing through ruins with speed that surprised him. His body responded faster than it had in the Matrix, lighter despite feeling more solid, as if this reality's physics obeyed different constraints. He vaulted collapsed walls, slid through gaps between pillars, navigated the labyrinth with instincts that anticipated the path before conscious thought. The Force moved with him, around him, guiding his steps along probability lines that avoided detection. For a time, the pursuit force deployed with military precision. Figures in dark robes spread through the ruins in coordinated search patterns, moving with supernatural grace. They carried weapons Neo recognized from his vision's lightsabers, blades of pure plasma contained by magnetic fields. But these warriors wore their ideology differently than the Jedi he had glimpsed. Their robes bore no symbols of peace or meditation. Their movements carried aggression barely restrained, power held in check only by strategic necessity. One of them stopped at the pillar where Neo had first touched the ruins. The figure knelt, placing a gloved hand against stone, and went rigid. When he spoke, his voice carried across the ruins with unnatural clarity, amplified by technique or technology Neo could not determine. He was here. The pattern confirms it. The Force screams his presence, an aberration that does not belong to this galaxy's weaving. Another figure approached, taller, moving with authority that demanded deference. Can you track him, Inquisitor? His signature is unlike anything in our records. Not Jedi, not Sith. Something that exists perpendicular to both traditions, as if he perceives the Force from an angle we cannot comprehend. The kneeling figure stood, turning slowly, hand extended. But yes, he leaves traces, disruptions, improbability, futures that should not exist collapsing into manifestation around his presence. Neo felt their attention sweep toward his hiding place like a physical pressure. He abandoned stealth, bursting from cover and sprinting toward the edge of the ruined field where the desert opened into endless dunes. Behind him, shouts erupted. Lightsabers ignited with characteristic snap hiss, bathing the ruins in crimson light. The pursuit began in earnest. He ran across sand that shifted beneath every step, threatening to trap him, to slow him to vulnerable speeds. The Force moved through his perception, showing him paths not as code, but as luminous lines tracing across the desert. Probability made visible. He followed the brightest path, trusting instinct over logic, and the sand seemed to firm beneath him, providing traction that should not exist. Behind, his pursuers struggled with the same terrain, their powers focused on attack rather than navigation. He gained distance, but they had vehicles. Speeders roared to life, repulsor-lift bikes that skimmed above the sand at speeds flesh could not match. Their pilots drove with reckless confidence, closing the gap with mechanical inevitability. Neo pushed himself harder, drawing on reserves he did not know he possessed, feeling the Force surge through his muscles like current through wire. The desert blurred, his coat whipped behind him. The speeders closed to 50 meters. 40. 30. One of the riders extended a hand, and the Force became weapon. Invisible pressure slammed into Neo's back, hurling him forward, tumbling him across sand that abraded exposed skin. He rolled, came up in a crouch, and faced his pursuers as they circled like wolves. 4 speeders. 8 warriors total. All of them radiating the kind of dark conviction that transcended mere belief and became identity. The leader dismounted with deliberate slowness, her lightsaber held in a loose grip that suggested absolute confidence. She was human, pale-skinned, with ritual scars covering her shaved scalp. Her eyes carried the yellow tint Neo had seen in darker visions, evidence of corruption by something the Jedi called the dark side, the Force wielded through passion and domination rather than serenity and service. "Thomas Anderson," she said, and the name in her mouth sounded like accusation. The one who broke the chains of the machines, the anomaly who rewrote reality itself. Do you know how long we have searched for proof that the ancient Exerthus were correct? That the Force itself could be reprogrammed by sufficient will and understanding? Neo said nothing, assessing threats, calculating odds. 8 trained Force users against 1 man who barely understood the rules of this reality. The mathematics were not favorable. But mathematics had never stopped him before. "The Inquisitorial serves the Emperor," the woman continued, beginning to circle. Her companions followed suit, maintaining the ring, cutting off escape vectors. "We hunt rogue Force sensitives, preserve the secrets of the Sith, and eliminate threats to the natural order. But you represent something unprecedented, not a threat to destroy, a resource to claim." "I'm not interested in serving another empire," Neo replied quietly. His voice emerged steady despite the adrenaline singing through his blood. "I've had enough of systems that demand submission." The Inquisitor smiled without warmth. "You misunderstand. The Emperor does not request service. He takes what serves his vision. You will be studied, dissected, if necessary. Your abilities will be understood and replicated." The technique that allowed you to perceive the underlying code of your reality will be adapted to perceive the Force's deepest structures. Through you, the Empire will achieve what the Zerathi could only theorize: complete mastery over causality itself. She raised her lightsaber. The other Inquisitors followed suit, 8 crimson blades creating a cage of light around him. The dark side pressed against Neo's consciousness like smoke, trying to find purchase, to corrupt, to dominate. He felt its seduction, the promise of power, of control, of bending reality through will alone. For someone who had spent his life fighting systems that claimed absolute authority, the temptation carried unexpected weight. He could rule here, could reshape this galaxy according to better principles, could eliminate suffering with the same totality he had once eliminated the Matrix's illusions. The thought disgusted him. He had watched that hunger consume Smith, had seen how the drive for perfect control led only to perfect sterility. Neo had not sacrificed himself to escape one prison only to build another. "No," he said simply. The Inquisitor's smile vanished. "Then you will be taken by force." She struck with speed that blurred human perception, lightsaber cutting a diagonal arc toward his neck. Neo reacted on instinct, hand rising to block, and the force erupted from his palm like concussive thunder. The invisible wave caught the Inquisitor mid-strike, hurling her backward 20 meters to crash into a speeder hard enough to crumple metal. The other Inquisitors attacked as one, a coordinated assault meant to overwhelm through numerical superiority and tactical precision. Neo moved between their strikes the way he had once moved between bullets. The Force showed him their intentions before conscious thought translated into action, probability clouds collapsing into certainty as he flowed through gaps in their offense. A lightsaber passed through the space his head had occupied a heartbeat before. Another carved the air where his torso should have been. He spun, ducked, twisted, never quite where the killing blow expected him. But defense alone would not save him. There were too many. They adapted too quickly, and his understanding of how to attack using the Force remained purely instinctual. One Inquisitor caught him with telekinetic pressure, pinning his left arm. Another seized his right leg, buckling his stance. The remaining 6 converged for the killing strike, 8 blades descending in a coordinated execution meant to divide his body into component parts. Neo reached for the Force not with technique but with desperation, with the same refusal to accept imposed limits that had allowed him to see beyond the Matrix. Reality stuttered. For a fraction of a second, he perceived the moment as the Zerathi must have not as fixed event but as probability field, as branching paths of cause and effect spreading outward from a single decision point. He saw the timeline where the blades found flesh, where he died in sand far from any world he had known, where his unique perspective was lost forever. He saw other timelines, thousands of them, variations too subtle to distinguish consciously, and he saw one path, narrow and improbable, where the geometry of the attack contained a flaw, where 7 simultaneous strikes could not all find the target if the target existed between their angles of approach. He collapsed the probability in his favor. The universe bent. When the lightsabers struck, they found only air. Neo stood 2 meters away, coat still settling from motion too fast for normal physics, his perception returning to normal flow with a sensation like surfacing from deep water. The Inquisitors stared, minds struggling to process what instruments insisted was impossible. Teleportation. No, not teleportation. Something subtler and more disturbing. He had edited his position within the probability field, moved not through space but through the parallel timelines where space measured differently. The lead Inquisitor rose from the wrecked speeder, blood streaming from a gash across her forehead. "Impossible," she whispered. "The Force does not bend that way, cannot bend that way. You are rewriting fundamental law." "Your law," Neo corrected. "Your interpretation." The Force showed me another way. She screamed fury and attacked with abandon, all technique discarded in favor of raw aggression. Dark-side energy crackled around her like living lightning, feeding on rage and fear and wounded pride. Her lightsaber moved in patterns designed not just to kill but to obliterate, to erase the offense he represented. Neo met her assault not with matching violence, but with something he had learned from Trinity, from Morpheus, from every teacher who had shown him that true strength emerged from acceptance rather than domination. He stopped fighting the Force and surrendered to its flow, stopped trying to impose will and instead became a conduit for its natural movement. The shift in perspective altered everything. He still perceived the patterns, still saw the probability clouds, but now he understood they represented not code to be hacked but partnership to be honored. The Force moved through him, around him, with him. He became part of the pattern rather than external observer trying to manipulate it. The Inquisitor's blade passed through empty space again and again, not because Neo was faster, because he was elsewhere, occupying the spaces between her intentions where violence could find no purchase. He flowed like water around stone, offering no resistance, absorbing no impact. And with each failed strike, with each moment her rage found no outlet, he felt her power diminish. The dark side fed on emotional extremity, but extremity without release became poison. She stumbled, exhausted. Her lightsaber wavered. Neo stood before her, unmarked, breathing easily. Around them, the other Inquisitors had ceased their attack, watching with growing unease as their leader faltered. "This is not how the Force works," she gasped. "This is not how reality works." "Maybe it's time to question your assumptions," Neo replied gently. "I spent most of my life trapped in a system because I believed it was real, believed it was the only way things could be. Breaking free meant accepting that reality has more possibilities than those in power want you to perceive." The Inquisitor's face twisted with something between fury and existential terror. She raised her lightsaber for a final, desperate strike and collapsed, unconscious, the Force sustaining her body finally withdrawing as exhaustion claimed its due. Her companions caught her, preventing her fall into sand, their eyes fixed on Neo with new assessment. He was not prey, not resource, something else entirely, something their training had not prepared them to confront. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then the Inquisitors retreated, carrying their leader, boarding their speeders and roaring back toward their ships. Neo watched them go, making no move to pursue. He had proven his point, given them reason to reconsider, to question, to perhaps choose differently than their Emperor demanded. Whether they would remain to be seen. Alone again in the desert, Neo sank to his knees. The adrenaline drained away, leaving trembling muscles and racing thoughts. He had survived, more than survived, had discovered something fundamental about how to exist in this reality, how to work with the Force rather than against it. But the encounter had also revealed how little he truly understood. The Inquisitors served an emperor who commanded power sufficient to dominate a galaxy. If that emperor learned what Neo represented, learned that the Force's fundamental nature might be questioned and reshaped, the resources brought to bear would make tonight's confrontation look like preliminary research. He needed allies, needed teachers who understood the Force from perspectives the Empire had not corrupted. The visions had shown him possibilities, monks in simple robes, wielding light against the dark, clinging to hope despite systematic annihilation. The Jedi, nearly extinct according to the patterns he had perceived, hunted across the galaxy, surviving only in hidden enclaves and forgotten spaces. Finding them would mean crossing a galaxy he barely understood, navigating politics and warfare with stakes measured in planetary populations. But he had crossed impossible distances before, had navigated the machine city to reach the source, had found truth hidden beneath layers of deception and control. He would do so again. Neo stood, brushing sand from his coat. The twin suns began their rise, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose. He turned his back on the ruins, on the Exerthus' broken dreams, and began walking toward whatever future the Force held. Behind him, his footprints filled with sand, erasing evidence of passage. Ahead, the pattern shifted, probability clouds blooming with new possibilities. The galaxy was about to learn that reality remained negotiable for those brave enough to question it. The spaceport on Tamarind clung to the edge of respectability like a drunk to a bar rail. Dust-choked streets wound between corrugated structures that might have been warehouses or might have been housing the line blurred in outer rim settlements where survival mattered more than aesthetics. Ships of questionable registration sat on landing pads maintained just well enough to avoid catastrophic failure during departure. The whole enterprise reeked of desperation masked as opportunity, the kind of place where imperial oversight remained minimal and questions about origin or destination were impolite at best. Neo had reached Tamarind through a combination of luck, stolen credits, and careful manipulation of probability. The journey from Exerthus had taken 3 weeks, most of it spent hiding in the cargo holds of various freighters whose captains never quite noticed the extra passenger. The Force made such invisibility easier than it had been in the Matrix. Where code had required active manipulation, the Force simply needed gentle suggestion, a nudge toward not looking, not questioning, not investigating the quiet spaces where unwanted attention slid away. But subtlety had limits. He needed proper transport, needed to reach the core worlds where rumor placed the last significant Jedi presence. That meant negotiation, currency, identity documents he did not possess, the kind of bureaucratic maze he had once navigated with false credentials and backdoor access. Here, without technology to exploit, the challenge required different approach. He made his way through the market district, observing. Tamarind's population was diverse humans, Twi'leks, Rhodians, species he had no names for, all pursuing the business of survival with varying degrees of success. Merchants hawked goods of dubious origin. Information brokers whispered in shadowed alcoves. Enforcers representing various criminal syndicates maintained order through strategic violence. The whole ecosystem ran on invisible rules, on power structures too entrenched to topple and too corrupt to trust. It reminded him of the Matrix more than he cared to admit. A disturbance rippled through the crowd ahead. Neo felt it through the Force before visual confirmation: aggression, fear, predator, and prey dynamics playing out with ritualized inevitability. He pushed through the press of bodies and found the scene he expected. 3 Gamorreans, massive pig-like humanoids who served as muscle for Hutt crime syndicates, had cornered a young human woman against a wall. She held a datapad defensively, eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from understanding exactly how bad the situation was. "You borrowed credits from Gracchus," the lead Gamorrean grunted, his basic crude but comprehensible. "Credits not repaid. Gracchus takes payment in goods or flesh. Your choice." "I have 2 more days," the woman protested, voice tight with controlled panic. The agreement specified 30 standard days. It's only been 28. "I have the documentation." The Gamorrean backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. The datapad clattered across pavement. "Documentation means nothing. Gracchus changes terms when Gracchus wants. You come now, or we break bones and then you come." Neo moved without conscious decision, the same instinct that had driven him to unplug from the Matrix despite knowing it meant abandoning comfortable illusion. He interposed himself between the Gamorreans and their target, hands loose at his sides, posture neutral but prepared. The crowd around them melted backward, recognizing the prelude to violence and wanting no part of it. "The lady said she has 2 more days," Neo said quietly. "Seems reasonable to honor the original contract." The lead Gamorrean blinked slowly, processing the interruption. Then he laughed, a wet, snorting sound. "You funny human. You think one man stops 3 Gamorrean? You think Gracchus cares about your opinion?" He cracked massive knuckles. "We take girl. We break you for inconvenience. Gracchus happy either way." They charged with the kind of mass that made finesse irrelevant. In the narrow street, surrounded by crowd and architecture, there was no room for elegant evasion. Neo met them directly, letting the Force guide his movements as he had during the confrontation with the Inquisitors. The first Gamorrean swung a fist the size of Neo's head with enough force to pulverize ribs. Neo sidestepped, redirected the momentum, and sent the creature stumbling past into the wall behind him. Stone cracked. The Gamorrean roared confusion. The second attacker learned from his companion's failure and grabbed instead of striking, massive arms wrapping around Neo's torso in a crushing bear hug. Air fled his lungs, ribs creaked. Pain flared white-hot as muscle and bone strained against force meant to rupture organs. Neo reached for the Force not as tool but as reality itself, perceiving the probability field around the moment. He saw the timeline where the Gamorrean crushed him to death, saw others where broken bones brought only temporary respite, and saw the narrow path where strength met greater strength. He pushed outward with telekinetic force, not carefully or with finesse, but with the desperate totality of someone fighting for breath. The Gamorrean flew backward, released him involuntarily, crashed into his companions with impact that sent all three sprawling. Neo dropped to one knee, gasping, ribs screaming protest. The Force had answered his need, but the cost remained real. Using it as weapon required expenditure, drew on reserves that felt finite, even if the Force itself was infinite. He was burning energy faster than smart tactics warranted. But the Gamorreans were down, tangled together, and the crowd's mood had shifted from anticipatory to shocked. Beings who survived Outer Rim realities knew how to assess combat effectiveness, and whatever they had just witnessed fell outside expected parameters for a lone human against Hutt enforcers. Neo stood carefully, moved to where the young woman still sat against the wall, and offered his hand. "You all right?" She stared at him with eyes the color of winter ice, calculating behind the fear. "Who are you?" "Someone who doesn't like bullies." He glanced at the Gamorreans, who were untangling themselves with ominous growls. "But we should probably leave before they recover." She took his hand, let him pull her upright, and scooped up her datapad in one smooth motion. "Follow me, quickly." They ran together through the market's labyrinth, the woman leading with the confidence of someone who knew every alley and shortcut. Behind them, the Gamorreans bellowed rage and gave chase, but mass that served well in intimidation proved liability in pursuit. Neo and his unlikely companion ducked through gaps too narrow for their pursuers, vaulted obstacles, cut through buildings whose occupants barely glanced up from business too important to interrupt. Within minutes, they had lost their tail in the urban maze. The woman pulled Neo into a cantina whose interior smelled of spilled alcohol and species-specific pheromones. She navigated to a corner booth, gestured for him to sit, and collapsed across from him with the relieved exhalation of someone who had just narrowly avoided catastrophe. "Thank you," she said after catching her breath. "That was unexpected and stupid. You just made an enemy of Gracchus the Hutt. He controls half the port's operations. You'll have bounty hunters on you by sunset." Neo shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time someone put a price on my head." She studied him with renewed intensity, and Neo recognized the look. He had seen it in Morpheus's eyes during their first meeting, in Trinity's expression when she explained that he might be the one. Assessment, possibility, the weighing of potential against probability. "You're not from around here," she observed. "Your clothes are wrong. Your accent doesn't match any core world education I know. And the way you moved against those Gamorreans." She leaned forward, voice dropping. "That was the Force. Raw and untrained, but the Force nonetheless. Are you a Jedi?" The question carried layers. Hope and suspicion mixed equally, the tone of someone who had learned to distrust easy answers but desperately wanted to believe in them anyway. Neo considered his response carefully. In his experience, honesty served better than deception when building alliances, but honesty required context these people lacked. "I'm not a Jedi," he said finally. "I'm not entirely sure what I am, but yes, I can use the Force. Learning how to do it properly is part of why I'm here." Here meaning Tamarind specifically, or here meaning the galaxy in general. "The galaxy. He paused, searching for words that would not sound insane. "I'm from somewhere else, somewhere very far away. I woke up on Exerthus 3 weeks ago with no memory of how I got there and no understanding of how anything works in this reality. I've been figuring it out as I go." The woman's expression cycled through disbelief, skepticism, and finally settled on cautious acceptance. "That's the most ridiculous story I've ever heard, which probably means it's true. In my experience, lies are more plausible." She extended her hand across the table. Kira Valen. Freelance data broker, occasional smuggler, full-time fugitive from Hutt debt collectors. Neo shook her hand. Thomas Anderson. Also called Neo. Neo. She tested the name, rolled it around her mouth like an unfamiliar flavor. Strange name, but then everything about you seems strange. Let me guess you need transport off-world, don't have credits, and can't provide standard identification because you literally don't exist in any database. That's accurate. Kira laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement despite their situation. You just saved me from being sold to pay off debts I legitimately owe. Against my better judgment and every survival instinct, I'm inclined to help you. But helping you means I need to know more about what you can actually do with the Force. Because if you're powerful enough, you might be valuable enough to trade for debt forgiveness. And if you're too powerful, you're dangerous enough that helping you is suicide. Neo appreciated the directness. It reminded him of the way resistance fighters had assessed him in Zion as tool, threat, or savior, with personal feelings secondary to utility. I can perceive patterns, he said carefully. Probability, causality, the underlying structure of how events connect. In my previous life, I used that perception to manipulate a different kind of reality. Here, I'm learning to work with the Force instead of against it. I can defend myself, can move objects without touching them, can suggest thoughts to those not expecting resistance. Beyond that, I'm still figuring out limits. Can you fight? Yes. Kill? He met her eyes steadily. When necessary. But I'd prefer not to. Kira nodded slowly, decision forming behind winter ice eyes. Okay, here's my offer. I have a ship barely functional, held together by spite and improvised repairs, but it flies. I need to leave Tamarind before Gracchus decides to make an example of me. You need transport to. Where exactly? Coruscant, or anywhere I might find surviving Jedi. She winced. Coruscant is the heart of Imperial power. The Jedi Temple is now the Emperor's palace. If there are any Jedi left, and that's a significant if they're not advertising their presence. But she tapped her datapad, pulling up navigation charts. There are rumors, whispers in the right cantinas about a hidden sanctuary. A place called Tython, ancient Jedi world lost during the Great Hyperspace War. Some say survivors gathered there, trying to rebuild away from Imperial sight. It's all third-hand information, probably nonsense, but it's the best lead I know. Then that's where we go. Just like that? No negotiation about price, no questions about my qualifications as pilot? Neo smiled slightly. You're sitting here offering to help a stranger fly to a probably mythical planet to find an extinct religious order while carrying debt from a crime syndicate. Either you're insane, or you have your own reasons for running that make my problems look manageable by comparison. Either way, I don't have better options. Kira's expression hardened. My reasons are my own, but you're right that Gracchus isn't my only problem. The Empire posted bounties on data brokers who trafficked in certain pre-purge archives. I may have sold a holocron to a Bothan collector who turned out to be an Imperial agent, so yes, I have motivation to disappear. And yes, your timing is convenient enough to be suspicious, except I watched you take on 3 Gamorrean enforcers to protect someone you'd never met. That kind of stupid nobility usually indicates someone who can be trusted not to shoot me the moment we're off-world. Usually. 90% confidence. She stood, gesturing for him to follow. The ship's at Docking Bay 7. We'll need to move fast. Gracchus will have spotters watching the major exits, and Imperial Customs runs random inspections. Our window for clean departure is maybe 2 hours before someone notices the pattern and locks down the port. They left the cantina through a back exit that opened onto a maintenance corridor smelling of ozone and recycled air. Kira moved with the ease of someone who had spent significant time evading pursuit, checking sightlines, avoiding security cameras, timing their passage to coincide with moments when attention focused elsewhere. Neo followed her lead, augmenting her knowledge with Force-enhanced perception. He felt surveillance systems before seeing them, sensed patrol patterns, anticipated the guards' movements with enough accuracy to guide Kira around potential confrontations. "You're good at this," she murmured, as they paused in a shadowed alcove while a squad of port security passed. "Most Force users I've heard about rely on combat power. You're doing something different, something subtle. In my previous life, I learned that the best fight is the one you avoid," Neo replied quietly. "Power without discretion just makes you a target." They reached Docking Bay 7 without incident. Kira's ship sat on the landing pad like a monument to optimistic engineering. The freighter was a YT-1300 Corellian light transport, a model Neo's newly acquired knowledge, identified as common but versatile. But this particular example had seen better decades. Scorch marks scarred the hull from near misses or poorly executed maintenance. The hyperdrive assembly jutted from the starboard side at an angle, suggesting either catastrophic damage or deeply questionable repairs. One of the forward mandibles showed stress fractures visible even from a distance. "She's beautiful," Kira said with the tone of someone daring contradiction. "Been with me 8 years. Keeps flying when shinier ships fail. I call her the uncertain proposition." "Appropriate name." "I thought so." She keyed the boarding ramp, which descended with ominous grinding sounds. "Cargo's mostly empty, which is good for keeping weight manageable and bad for explaining why we're launching. I've got forged manifest claiming we're hauling medical supplies to Bakura, which should satisfy customs if they don't look too closely. Once we hit hyperspace, we'll recalculate for Tython, based on coordinates I pulled from a drunk archaeologist's ramblings." The interior of the uncertain proposition matched the exterior's aesthetic functional decay, maintained through improvisation. Exposed wiring ran along bulkheads, control panels flickered with intermittent power. The cockpit seats showed patches over patches, the original upholstery long since surrendered to comfort's distant memory. But the ship felt lived in rather than abandoned, maintained by someone who understood systems intimately enough to keep them running past any reasonable expectation. Kira slid into the pilot's seat with practiced ease and began the pre-flight sequence. Her hands moved across controls with the kind of unconscious competence that came from doing the same task 10,000 times. Neo took the co-pilot's position, watching readouts that meant nothing to him but recognizing the patterns anyway. The Force showed him connections between systems, the flow of power and intention that made the ship more than inert metal. It was not alive the way the Matrix's code had been alive, but it possessed character, personality, history written in scorch marks and repairs. "Tower, this is uncertain proposition requesting departure clearance for Bakura run," Kira said into the comm, her voice shifting to board professionalism. "Manifest filed, fees paid, ship cleared for launch." Static crackled. Then a voice emerged, flat with bureaucratic indifference. "Proposition. You're cleared for departure on Vector 79er. Watch your thruster balance on ascent. Last 3 launches from Bay 7 showed instability. Acknowledged, Tower." Vector 79er, watching thrusters. Proposition out. The ship shuddered as repulsor lifts engaged, lifting them from the pad with sounds that suggested imminent mechanical failure. Neo gripped his seat's armrests as the ascent began, the whole vessel shaking like a thing possessed. Kira's hands danced across controls, making constant micro-adjustments that kept them stable despite the instability trying to tear them apart. Through the viewport, Tamarind fell away, dusty streets shrinking to geometric patterns, then to texture, then to abstraction as they climbed toward the darkness between stars. "How long until we can jump to hyperspace?" Neo asked, raising his voice over the engine noise. 3 minutes to clear the gravity well, another 2 for calculations. Then we... Alarms screamed across the cockpit. Kira swore with impressive creativity as she checked readouts. Imperial Patrol, 2 Star Destroyers in high orbit, running interdiction protocol. They're demanding we heave to for inspection. Neo felt the Imperial presence through the Force before seeing their ships. Massive triangular vessels hanging in space like predators, bristling with weapons, exuding the kind of absolute authority that expected obedience rather than requesting it. TIE fighters launched from their hangars, swarms of solar-paneled attackers moving to intercept the uncertain proposition's ascent. "Can we outrun them?" Neo asked. "Not in real space. Our only chance is jumping to hyperspace before they get tractor lock. Then jump. Calculations aren't complete. Jumping blind in a gravity well is suicide." Neo reached for the Force, letting his perception expand. He saw the planet below, felt its mass distorting space-time, saw the star destroyers and their gravity well projectors creating artificial wells to prevent escape, saw the TIE fighters closing, their pilots' intentions clear as daylight. And he saw something else: probability lines threading through the chaos, narrow paths where success remained possible if specific actions occurred at precise moments. "I can see the path," he said, with certainty he did not question. "Input heading 173 Mark 8. Jump on my mark." Kira stared at him. "That's insane. You don't have the training, don't know the math, can't possibly. Trust me." She held his gaze for 2 heartbeats. Then she laughed, the sound half panic and half exhilaration. "Why not? Going to die anyway if I don't try something desperate." Her hands flew across controls, inputting the heading, bypassing safety protocols, feeding power to the hyperdrive that howled protest at being pushed before proper calculations. "On your mark, mysterious stranger who can see the future. No pressure." The TIE fighters opened fire. Green laser bolts stitched across the viewport, missing by meters as Kira threw the ship into evasive maneuvers that pushed inertial compensators to their limits. The Star Destroyer's tractor beams reached out, invisible fingers trying to grab them, to hold them, to drag them back into custody and interrogation. Neo felt the moment approaching, the narrow window where all factors aligned for the fraction of a second that made success possible. Now, Kira punched the hyperdrive. For a terrible instant, nothing happened. Then reality twisted, space itself distorting as the uncertain proposition punched through into hyperspace with none of the grace or safety standard protocol demanded. The transition felt like being torn apart and reassembled simultaneously. Neo's perception shattered across multiple dimensions, showing him the tunnel they carved through space-time, the dancing possibilities of routes not taken, the screaming danger of too close encounters with stellar bodies and gravitic anomalies. The Force held it all together by the thinnest margin, his will and the ship's systems collaborating to maintain coherence against odds that should have reduced them to dispersed particles. Then they were through, stable in hyperspace, the blue-white tunnel stretching ahead with hypnotic regularity. Alarms still screamed, but Kira silenced them with practiced slaps. She slumped in her seat, breathing hard, sweat darkening her hair. "That was..." She struggled for words. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. And it worked. We're alive. Actually alive." She turned to Neo, eyes wide. "How did you know?" "I told you. I can see patterns. Probability. What needs to happen for desired outcomes to manifest. That's not the Force. That's something else. Something I've never heard of any Force user doing." Neo said nothing, attention focused on the hyperspace tunnel. Through the Force, he felt their trajectory, felt the currents of space-time they rode, felt the destination approaching. Tython, ancient Jedi world, sanctuary or myth they would discover soon enough. But more than that, he felt something else. A presence waiting at their destination, powerful, patient, aware of their approach. The Force was drawing him somewhere specific, and he suspected that whatever waited there would either kill him or teach him how to survive what was coming. The galaxy had already noticed him. The Inquisitorius had tried to claim him. The Empire would not stop with one failed attempt. He needed to understand the Force deeply enough to remain uncaptured, to avoid becoming a tool for another system of control, and he needed to do it quickly. The ship hurtled through hyperspace toward uncertain answers. Behind them, the Empire mobilized resources to find the anomaly that had escaped. Ahead, ancient secrets waited in forgotten temples, and inside Neo, power he barely understood coiled like a spring, waiting for purpose, waiting for direction, waiting to be tested against the true darkness that ruled this galaxy. The uncertain proposition emerged from hyperspace with alarms blaring and systems protesting the abuse they had endured. Tython hung before them, a world of green continents and blue oceans wrapped in wisps of white cloud. It looked peaceful, untouched, the kind of planet that recruitment holos showed when selling the promise of galactic citizenship and prosperity. But Neo felt the truth beneath appearances. The force radiated from Tython's surface with intensity that made his perception ache, as if the planet itself was conscious and watching their approach with ancient attention. Scanners are picking up massive force disturbances planetside, Kira reported, studying readouts with growing unease. Energy signatures consistent with force users in active combat. Lots of them, and there's wreckage in orbit, recent kills, still warm. Someone had a battle here within the last standard day. Neo extended his awareness, touching the patterns. He felt combat indeed, felt the clash of light and dark happening in Tython's northern hemisphere, felt Jedi fighting with desperate skill against overwhelming numbers, felt the presence of Inquisitors, of Imperial troops, of dark side warriors who wielded corruption like artists wielded paint. The sanctuary was under siege. "Can we get past orbital defenses?" he asked. "What orbital defenses? There's nothing up here but debris. Either Tython never had them, or they've been destroyed. We could set down anywhere. Question is whether we want to land in the middle of a war zone." Neo watched the planet turn beneath them, felt the force pulling his attention to specific locations. The main battle raged around what his awareness identified as the Tython Jedi Temple, a massive structure built into a mountainside in the northern continent. Imperial forces had surrounded it, laying siege with the kind of methodical brutality the Empire favored. Starfighters strafed defensive positions. Artillery pounded ancient walls. Stormtroopers pressed forward in disciplined waves while Inquisitors hunted surviving Jedi through the ruins. But elsewhere on the planet, isolated from the main confrontation, he felt another presence, singular, powerful, waiting with the patience of stone. It called to him through the Force with gentle insistence, not demanding but inviting, suggesting that answers lay in that direction if he was brave enough to seek them. "There," Neo said, pointing to coordinates his perception provided. "Southern continent. Uninhabited region. Set us down there." Kira input the coordinates and frowned. "That's jungle. Dense canopy. No clearings large enough for a ship this size. We'll have to use the emergency thruster packs and rappel down." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Your funeral." She began the descent, bringing them into atmosphere with the same controlled chaos that characterized all her piloting. The uncertain proposition shuddered through re-entry, hull plating screaming protest, but held together through sheer stubbornness. Tython's surface resolved from abstraction to detail. Forests that had stood for millennia, rivers cutting through stone, ruins of civilizations that predated the Republic scattered across the landscape like forgotten dreams. They descended toward the coordinates, and Neo saw what waited. A valley nestled between mountains, hidden from casual observation, filled with structures that made the Xerathi ruins look primitive by comparison. Temples built from materials that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, their angles wrong in ways that suggested they were designed to channel rather than shelter. Gardens where plants grew in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, and at the valley's center, a tower that stretched toward the sky with impossible grace, its surface covered in glyphs that shifted and changed as he watched, rewriting themselves according to principles he could almost grasp. The presence he had felt emanated from that tower. Waiting. Kira brought them to hover above the canopy, unable to descend further without risking the ship. "This is as close as I can get. You're really going down there alone? Will you wait for me?" She considered the question seriously. 2 standard hours. After that, I'm assuming you're dead and leaving before Imperial patrols find me. Fair? Fair. Neo stood, moved to the airlock. If I don't make it back, jump to the outer rim and disappear. You don't deserve to die for helping me. Appreciated, but you're not getting rid of me that easily. I've made too many bad decisions to start making smart ones now. She grinned without humor. Go find your answers, Neo. Try not to get killed by whatever's down there. He rappelled down through the canopy, using cable and harness Kira provided. The descent took 15 minutes, passing through layers of vegetation dense enough to block most sunlight. The air grew thick with moisture and organic decay, the smell of life consuming itself to fuel more life. When his feet touched ground, he released the cable and watched it retract into darkness above. Then he was alone in primordial forest, surrounded by sounds of creatures he had no names for, walking toward a presence that felt older than civilizations. The valley structures revealed themselves gradually as he approached, emerging from jungle like monuments to forgotten purpose. The architecture followed principles that made his perception of the Force sharpen involuntarily. Every angle, every proportion, every material choice had been selected to resonate with specific aspects of the Force's nature. Walking through the valley felt like walking through a 3-dimensional textbook on Force theory written by beings who understood it at fundamental levels lost to modern practitioners. The tower waited at the center, its entrance a simple archway that somehow contained infinite depth. Neo paused at the threshold, reaching out with the Force, probing for danger or deception. What he found was invitation, welcome, and underneath it, curiosity. Whoever or whatever waited inside wanted to meet him as much as he needed to meet them. He crossed the threshold. The interior defied the exterior's apparent dimensions. The tower expanded around him into a space that could have held a city, filled with floating platforms connected by bridges of pure light. Knowledge lined the walls holocrons by the thousands, their glowing crystalline forms pulsing with stored wisdom. Archives that made the Matrix's data core look small, the collected learning of civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity learned to make fire. At the center of this impossible space, on a platform suspended by nothing but will, sat a figure in mediation. The being appeared humanoid but ancient, skin like weathered leather, eyes closed, breathing so slow that minutes passed between inhalations. They wore robes that might have been white once but had faded to the color of old bone. Power radiated from them with such intensity that Neo felt his knees weaken, felt the Force respond to their presence like iron to a lodestone. The figure's eyes opened. They were the color of stars dying, bright with accumulated wisdom and sorrow. Thomas Anderson, the ancient being said in a voice like wind through canyons. The anomaly, the one who broke reality's chains in a universe far from this one. Welcome to Tython, birthplace of the Jedi Order. I am Master Veran, last keeper of the original truths. Neo climbed the light bridge to stand before the keeper, maintaining respectful distance. You know who I am, what I am. The Force knows you, Veran corrected gently. And I listen to the Force with attention most beings abandon after childhood. You arrived on Exerthus 3 weeks ago, drawn through the spaces between realities by forces neither you nor I fully understand. You carry within you the ability to perceive the Force as structure rather than mystery, as code that can be read if not rewritten. The Exerthi called this vision the pattern sight. They believed it represented the next evolution of Force sensitivity. They were correct, and it destroyed them. Why? Veran gestured, and the space around them transformed. The tower faded, replaced by vision of a thriving civilization. Neo saw the Exerthi at their peak, millions strong, spread across dozens of worlds, building wonders through application of Force principles they had decoded and mastered. They moved planets with thought, healed diseases with intention, reshaped matter according to theoretical models. They were gods limited only by imagination and will. Then the vision shifted. Neo saw the Exerthi's power turn inward, saw them begin experimenting with causality itself, saw them attempt to rewrite fundamental laws, to edit the Force's nature, to transcend the binary of light and dark by creating new categories that existed perpendicular to both. The Force responded. Not with anger, the Force held no emotion, but with correction, with the kind of fundamental reality reassertion that occurred when a system detected corrupted code and restored defaults. The Exerthus civilization vanished in a single day, not destroyed by violence but edited out of existence. Probability clouds collapsed so they had never been. Their worlds remained, but empty. Their works persisted, but purposeless. Only fragments survived ruins on forgotten planets, warnings encoded in stone for those brave or foolish enough to seek them. The vision released him. Neo stumbled, catching himself on the platform's edge. They tried to hack the Force. It defended itself by deleting them. An oversimplification, but essentially correct, Varan confirmed. The Force is not code in the sense you understand from your previous existence. It is the foundational reality from which all other realities emerge. Manipulating its manifestations is possible, we call that Force use. But attempting to rewrite its fundamental nature triggers defensive responses built into the fabric of existence itself. The Exerthus learned this too late. I hope you will learn it in time. Neo met the ancient Jedi's gaze. Then why did the Force bring me here? Why give me the ability to perceive patterns if using that perception leads to annihilation? An excellent question, one I have meditated on since sensing your arrival. Varan stood, moving with the slow grace of someone whose body had long since ceased to matter as much as spirit. The Force gives you this gift not to change its nature, but to understand it more completely, to see clearly what others perceive only dimly. You are not meant to hack the Force, Thomas Anderson. You are meant to comprehend it, and through comprehension to make choices that serve balance rather than domination. The Inquisitors who hunted me on Exerthus said the Emperor wants to study my abilities, to replicate them, to achieve total control over causality. Yes, the Emperor pursues the same path the Exerthus walked. He believes that sufficient understanding of the Force will grant him the power to reshape reality according to his will. He does not understand that the Force will tolerate manipulation but will not permit subjugation. His ambition will destroy him. The only question is how much of the galaxy he takes with him when that reckoning comes. Varan gestured, and a holocron floated from the wall to hover between them. Its crystalline surface pulsed with soft blue light, knowledge waiting to be accessed. This holocron contains the complete archives of the Exerthus' research, their successes, their failures, the limits they discovered, the warnings they left for anyone who followed their path. I give it to you freely, with one condition. What condition? That you use this knowledge not to transcend the Force but to serve it. That you accept your role not as master but as partner. That you remember the Exerthus' fate and choose differently than they chose. Neo took the holocron carefully, feeling its weight in his palm. Knowledge hummed against his skin, information dense enough to take lifetimes to absorb fully. But more than that, he felt the responsibility Varan placed on him. The burden of choosing wisely when power offered shortcuts and temptations. I've spent my entire existence fighting systems that demanded submission, Neo said quietly. The Matrix wanted me to be a battery-powering delusion. The machines wanted me to accept their control as inevitable. You're asking me to serve the Force. How is that different? Because the Force does not demand, Varan replied. It invites, it suggests, it offers possibility, but respects choice. You can work with it or against it, but it will not force your compliance. The Exerthus tried to dominate the Force and paid the ultimate price. The Sith try to bend it to will and poison themselves with its corruption. The Jedi seek to serve it and sometimes lose themselves in passivity. But you have the potential to walk a middle path, to perceive the Force's structure without needing to control it, to partner with it rather than master or submit to it. You make it sound simple. It is anything but simple. It requires constant vigilance, constant choice, constant willingness to question your own motivations. Varan placed a weathered hand on Neo's shoulder, the touch conveying warmth despite the ancient being's apparent frailty. But you have already walked this path before. In your previous reality, you broke the Matrix not by dominating its code, but by understanding it deeply enough to know when to act and when to accept. You sacrificed yourself not for power, but for peace. That same wisdom, applied here, could make you the most dangerous weapon against the Emperor's ambition, or the greatest hope for balance the galaxy has known in millennia. Thunder rolled across the valley, ominous and close. Varan's expression shifted, showing concern for the first time. The siege of the temple has collapsed. The Jedi defenders are scattering, fleeing into the wilderness. The Inquisitorius hunts them systematically, and something else comes, something I have not felt since the Clone Wars ended. Neo felt it too. A presence descending through atmosphere with terrible purpose. Power vast enough to distort the Force's natural flow, to bend light and probability around itself like a singularity bends space-time. Darth Vader, the Emperor's fist. The fallen Jedi who had helped slaughter his own order and now served darkness with absolute conviction. "He comes for you," Varan said softly. "The Emperor sensed your presence through the Force, sensed the threat you represent to his vision of absolute control. He sends Vader to capture or kill you. And Vader does not fail. Can I fight him? Perhaps. You have power. But Vader has experience, training, and commitment to the dark side that gives him strength you cannot yet match. Fighting him now would be suicide." Varan moved to the tower's edge, gazing out at the valley. But there may be another way. The Exerthus discovered something in their final days, a technique they called phase walking. It allows a Force user to shift between parallel timelines, to exist in multiple probability states simultaneously, making them nearly impossible to predict or attack. They never perfected it. The attempt contributed to their annihilation. But you are not Exerthus. Your unique perception might allow you to succeed where they failed. Neo felt the holocron in his hand pulse, offering knowledge. He opened his mind to it, and information flooded in. The Exerthus' research on phase walking unfolded across his consciousness equations rendered in Force theory, diagrams showing how to perceive and navigate probability branches, warnings about the dangers of existing between states for too long. It was advanced, dangerous, potentially catastrophic if executed incorrectly, but also achingly familiar. He had done something similar in the Matrix, existing between bullet time and normal flow, perceiving multiple timelines and choosing between them. "How long do I have?" he asked. "Minutes, perhaps less. Vader's shuttle has entered the valley. He knows we are here." Neo closed his eyes, feeling the Force move through him and around him. He reached for the technique Varan had shown him, feeling its structure, understanding its principles. Phase walking required splitting consciousness across multiple probability branches simultaneously while maintaining coherent identity. It required perceiving yourself as wave function rather than fixed particle, as possibility rather than certainty. The Exerthus had tried to achieve this through meditation and ritual. Neo attempted it through direct perception of the probability field, using the same mental muscles he had developed seeing the Matrix's code. Reality fractured around him. Suddenly he stood in 3 places simultaneously on the platform with Varan at the tower's entrance and suspended above the valley in pure Force form. Each version of himself was equally real, equally present, each perceiving from different angles. The sensation was overwhelming, threatening to fragment his identity across the variants. But he held on, remembering Trinity's advice from so long ago: focus not on what you are, but on what you choose to become. The tower's entrance exploded inward. Darth Vader strode through smoke and debris, his black armor reflecting no light, his breathing mechanically regular, his presence in the Force like standing before an active volcano. The Dark Lord paused, helmet turning as sensors swept the space. Then he looked up directly at Neo's position and spoke in a voice like gravel grinding against stone. "Anomaly. The Emperor has foreseen your coming. You will submit to his will or be destroyed. There are no alternatives. Neo spoke from all three positions simultaneously, his voice echoing across probability. I've heard that before. It wasn't true then either. Vader's lightsaber ignited, its crimson blade casting bloody light across ancient walls. Defiance is meaningless. The Force bows to strength, and I am strength incarnate. He struck with speed that made the Inquisitors look slow, his blade cutting through space where Neo's primary form stood. The lightsaber passed through empty air. Neo had shifted between probability states, existing now only in the forms at the entrance and above the valley. Vader adjusted instantly, reaching out with telekinetic force to crush the version at the entrance, but that form dispersed into probability, becoming potential rather than actual, and reconstituted behind the Dark Lord with timing Vader could not have predicted. You perceive the branches, Vader observed, turning to face him. A useful trick. But tricks will not save you from true power. The Dark Lord unleashed the Force in its rawest form, a wave of concussive pressure that would have liquefied organs and shattered bone. Neo met it not with resistance, but with phase walking, splitting himself across a dozen probability branches as the wave passed through spaces he no longer fully occupied. The attack dispersed into timelines where he was not present, harmless to the fragments that remained, but maintaining that many parallel states exhausted him. Neo felt his consciousness straining, felt the technique beginning to destabilize. He collapsed the variants back into three primary forms, regaining solidity at the cost of vulnerability. Vader pressed the advantage, attacking all three positions simultaneously with a combination of lightsaber combat and force attacks. The Dark Lord's mastery was absolute, each strike perfectly calculated, each use of power precisely measured. Experience and dark conviction combining into an assault that gave Neo no time to think, only react. He fell back on instinct, on the same combat awareness that had kept him alive against agents. The Force guided his movements, showed him gaps in Vader's offense, led him through the spaces between destruction. But Vader adapted with each exchange, learning Neo's patterns, predicting his responses, closing the gaps with relentless efficiency. This was not a Gamorrean thug or an Inquisitor drunk on power. This was a warrior who had helped destroy the Jedi Order, who had hunted Force users across the galaxy for 2 decades, who knew every trick and technique the light side could produce. Neo's primary form took a glancing blow from Vader's lightsaber, the plasma blade scorching his shoulder. Pain exploded across all three variants as feedback from the injury cascaded through the phase-walking connection. He stumbled, the technique wavering, probability forms beginning to collapse back into singular presence. Vader sensed the weakness and moved for the kill. Master Veran intervened. The ancient Jedi unleashed force power that made the tower shake, that lit the valley in blinding white light, that struck Vader with the accumulated wisdom and strength of someone who had studied the Force for centuries. The Dark Lord staggered, caught off guard by opposition he had not anticipated from someone he had dismissed as irrelevant. "Run, Thomas Anderson," Veran called, his voice strained but resolute. "I cannot hold him long. Take the holocron, learn what the Zerathi knew, find your own path between light and dark. And remember that choice, not power, determines who we become." Neo hesitated, combat instincts warring with strategic necessity. Leaving Veran to face Vader alone felt like abandonment, like cowardice. But he recognized tactical reality when the Force showed it to him. He could not defeat Vader yet, could barely survive him. Staying meant capture or death, neither of which served any purpose beyond pride. He ran. The tower exploded behind him as Vader and Veran clashed with forces that transcended normal combat. Neo felt the shockwave, felt reality itself strain under the weight of their confrontation. He sprinted through the valley with all three of his phase-walking forms, each taking different routes, dividing Vader's attention should the Dark Lord pursue. The jungle swallowed him, ancient trees providing cover, the Force guiding him toward the uncertain proposition's location. He felt Varan's presence wink out like a candle in a hurricane, felt the ancient Jedi's death, not in agony but in peace, as if the Keeper had been waiting for this moment for years. Grief lanced through Neo, sharp and unexpected. He had known Varan for less than an hour, but the loss felt profound. Another teacher dead, another guide sacrificed so he could live and learn. He would make that sacrifice matter. Neo collapsed the phase walking as he reached the rappel point, exhaustion making the technique unsustainable. He triggered his comlink, gasping. "Kira, I'm at the extraction point. We need to leave. Now." The cable dropped from above. Neo grabbed it, felt himself jerked upward with uncomfortable speed. Kira's voice crackled through static. "We've got Imperial TIE fighters incoming. Whatever you did down there, it got their attention. Strap in and pray my ship holds together for one more hyperspace jump." He hauled himself into the airlock as the uncertain proposition's engines roared to life. Through the viewport, he saw TIE fighters screaming toward them from the direction of the besieged temple. Saw Vader's shuttle rising from the valley, slower than the fighters but inexorable. Saw the planet falling away as Kira pushed their ship to maximum thrust, climbing toward the edge of the gravity well and the safety of hyperspace beyond. "Can we make it?" Neo asked, collapsing into the co-pilot's seat. "Define make it," Kira replied, hands dancing across controls. "If you mean survive the next 30 seconds, maybe. If you mean escape without critical damage, unlikely. If you mean avoid a slow suffocation death when life support fails 3 jumps from now, I make no promises." Laser fire stitched across their shields. The TIE fighters had range, and their pilots showed the kind of aggressive competence that made Imperial training feared across the galaxy. Kira jinked and weaved, burning fuel they could not afford to waste, but keeping them alive through skill and desperation. The hyperspace calculation crawled toward completion as shields took hit after hit, degrading with each impact. Neo reached for the Force again, feeling the probability field, seeing the paths. He spoke coordinates without conscious thought, giving Kira the route that the Force showed him would work. She input them without question, trusting in the same mysterious ability that had saved them during their first escape. Jumping in 3, 2, 1. The uncertain proposition punched into hyperspace just as shields failed completely. Behind them, the TIE fighters' last volley passed through empty space. Ahead, the blue-white tunnel of hyperspace promised temporary safety. Kira slumped in her seat, breathing hard, trembling with adrenaline crash. "I think I'm starting to regret helping you," she said without conviction. "This is way more excitement than I signed up for." Neo pulled the holocron from his coat, feeling its weight. Knowledge waited inside, dangerous knowledge that had destroyed the Xerathi, that the Emperor craved, that might offer him the understanding he needed to survive what was coming. But more than that, he felt Varan's sacrifice weighing on him. The ancient Jedi had died to give him this chance, to give him time to learn, to grow, to become whatever the Force needed him to become. He would not waste that gift. "How long until we reach safe harbor?" he asked quietly. "Depends on your definition of safe. I know a smuggler's haven in the tertiary outer rim. No Imperial presence, no questions asked, plenty of people who can provide fake credentials and ship repairs. It's 3 jumps away, assuming this ship holds together. Why? I need time to study, to understand what Varan gave me. And I need you to teach me how to survive in this galaxy without drawing Imperial attention every time I step outside." Kira studied him with those winter ice eyes, calculating. "You're planning something that goes beyond just hiding from the Empire. The Emperor is trying to achieve total control over the Force, to reshape reality according to his will. If he succeeds, this entire galaxy becomes another matrix, everyone trapped in a system they can't perceive, let alone escape. I've seen that future. I've lived it. I won't let it happen again." "So what? You're going to fight the entire galactic empire, you, one man, against the most powerful military force in history." Neo smiled slightly, remembering Morpheus's certainty, Trinity's faith, tanks belief in the impossible. I've fought impossible battles before, won some of them too. You're insane. Probably. But insanity tends to work better than sanity when facing systematic oppression. Kira laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement despite their situation. All right, mysterious stranger who can see the future and phase between realities, I'll get you to safe harbor. I'll teach you how to blend in, how to navigate the underworld, how to avoid imperial entanglements, but after that, we're done. I don't do suicide missions against Dark Lords and Emperors. I'm a survivor, not a martyr. Fair enough. Neo settled deeper into his seat, exhaustion finally catching up. Wake me when we arrive. I need to meditate, process what I've learned, figure out next steps. He closed his eyes, letting the force flow through him. The holocron pulsed against his chest, knowledge waiting to be absorbed. Veran's voice echoed in memory, warning and encouraging simultaneously. The Xereth's fate haunted him, a reminder of what happened when hubris exceeded wisdom. But underneath it all, he felt something else. A certainty he recognized from his time in the Matrix. The sense that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what needed doing, even if the path remained unclear. The force moved through him like breath, like blood, connecting him to all living things. He perceived its patterns, its structures, its infinite complexity, and he understood, with growing clarity, that Veran had been right. He was not meant to hack the force, was not meant to control it or dominate it, or reshape it to his will. He was meant to understand it so completely that working with it became as natural as breathing, to perceive its nature so clearly that serving balance felt like freedom rather than constraint, to become not its master but its partner, dancing with destiny rather than fighting it. The galaxy needed that kind of force user, needed someone who could see the system without being trapped by it, who could fight tyranny without becoming tyrannical, who could hold power without being corrupted by power's seduction. Neo did not know if he could become that person, but he would try, because the alternative was accepting that the Emperor's vision was inevitable, that control was destiny, that freedom was illusion. And he had spent too many lifetimes proving those assumptions wrong to accept them now. The uncertain proposition carried them deeper into hyperspace, away from Tython and its fallen defenders, away from Vader's hunting presence, toward the chaotic freedom of the Outer Rim, where people survived by adapting rather than submitting. Neo let the meditation deepen, let consciousness drift between waking and dreams, and in that liminal space, the Force showed him visions. He saw the Emperor on his throne, eyes like yellow fire, perceiving the disturbance Neo represented and planning countermeasures with the patient malevolence of someone who had manipulated galactic events for decades. He saw Vader hunting across the galaxy, following traces of Neo's presence, determined to claim him for the Emperor's purposes. He saw Inquisitors mobilizing, bounty hunters receiving commissions, entire fleets redirected to search for the anomaly that could perceive the Force's underlying code. But he also saw hope, saw scattered Jedi survivors teaching younglings in hidden enclaves, saw rebellion forming in the shadows of imperial tyranny, ordinary people finding courage to resist despite overwhelming odds, saw individuals across the galaxy making small choices that served light over dark, balance over domination, compassion over cruelty. The Empire was vast, but it was not absolute, not yet. Not while people still chose differently than their oppressors demanded. Neo opened his eyes to stars streaming past in hyperspace blur and felt purpose crystallize into certainty. He would learn what the Xerethi had known, would master phase walking and the other techniques they had pioneered, would become dangerous enough that the Emperor had to take him seriously, and then he would do what he had done in the Matrix. He would offer everyone a choice, would show them the system that claimed to be reality, would prove that freedom remained possible even in a galaxy ruled by fear. The One had freed humanity from the machines. Neo would free the galaxy from the Empire, or die trying.